The CEO whispered, "I can't walk." The Shy Maid's next move shocked everyone. Before we begin the story, let us know in the comments which city and country you are watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And at the very end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Now enjoy the story. The Grand Vermilion Hotel in Manhattan was not merely a place to sleep. It was a cathedral devoted to excess, power, and silence. Its corridors were lined with silk wallpaper that cost more per yard than most people earned in a month, and the carpets were so thick they seemed to swallow the sound of footsteps completely. But on this particular Tuesday evening, the silence on the 40th floor, the executive penthouse level, was about to be shattered by a quiet, devastating catastrophe. Alexander Blackwood, the 39-year-old CEO of Blackwood Dynamics, and the man recently dubbed the Architect of the Future by Forbes magazine, was walking down this corridor. To an outside observer, he looked like a god of industry in motion. His bespoke navy suit was tailored to within a millimeter of perfection, accentuating a frame kept lean by 4 a.m. workouts and a diet that allowed for zero indulgence. He checked his platinum watch. He had exactly 7 minutes to reach the Sapphire Ballroom downstairs. 7 minutes to walk onto a stage, flash his trademark confident smile, and announce the acquisition of a rival aerospace firm that would cement his legacy as the most powerful man in tech. But inside Alexander's body, a civil war was raging. It had started 3 weeks ago as a dull ache in his lower lumbar region, a nagging sensation he had dismissed as the price of sitting in long board meetings. He was Alexander Blackwood. He didn't do sick days. He treated his body like an employee that was complaining. He simply ignored it and demanded it work harder. But over the last 48 hours, the dull ache had mutated into something sharper, colder, and infinitely more terrifying. It felt as though an invisible wire was being tightened around his spine, sending intermittent shocks of electricity down his left leg. He adjusted his tie, his fingers trembling slightly, a weakness he immediately hid by clenching his fist. "Pull it together, Alex. You are 7 minutes away from the finish line. Do not falter now." He took a step. A sharp, white-hot needle of pain pierced through his hip. He gritted his teeth, his jawline tightening, forcing his leg to move through sheer willpower. He had built a billion-dollar empire from a garage in Detroit. Surely he could walk 20 yards to the elevator. He took another step. The carpet seemed to tilt. The pain vanished, replaced by a sudden, horrifying absence of sensation. It was as if the signal from his brain to his legs had been severed with a pair of scissors. His right foot caught on the plush carpet. He didn't stumble, he collapsed. It wasn't a graceful fall. It was the heavy, uncontrolled impact of dead weight hitting the floor. Alexander slammed onto his hands and knees, his expensive leather briefcase skidding away and hitting the wall with a loud, echoing crack. The shock of the impact knocked the air out of his lungs. For a second, he just stared at the intricate patterns of the carpet, his mind unable to process the data. He tried to push himself up, commanding his legs to engage, to stand, to be strong. Nothing happened. From the waist down, Alexander Blackwood was gone. Panic, cold and primal, washed over him. He clawed at the wall, dragging his upper body up, straining every muscle in his torso, sweat instantly beading on his forehead. He managed to get one knee up, but it buckled like wet cardboard, sending him crashing back down onto his shoulder. The humiliation was more agonizing than the injury. He was the Iron CEO. He was the man who never blinked. And now he was crawling on a hotel floor like a wounded animal. He heard the soft chime of the elevator at the end of the hall. The doors were opening. Voices floated out. Laughter, the clinking of glasses, the chatter of potential investors heading to his gala. If they saw him like this, broken, helpless, crawling, his stock would plummet before the market opened. The sharks he called partners would smell blood in the water. He would be finished. "Please, no," he rasped, his voice cracking. He tried to drag himself behind a decorative marble pillar, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I can't walk." He whispered the words, but in the silence of the hallway they sounded like a scream. He closed his eyes, waiting for the flash of camera phones, waiting for the end of his career. But the flash didn't come. Instead, there was a soft rustle of fabric, the squeak of rubber soles stopping abruptly, and the smell of cheap lemon cleaner cutting through his expensive cologne. Clara had been invisible for most of her life. At 24, she was a ghost in the machine of the Grand Vermilion Hotel. She was a member of the housekeeping staff, specifically assigned to the late-night turn-down service. She wore a generic gray uniform that was 2 sizes too big, meant to hide her figure and strip away her individuality. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, practical bun, and she kept her eyes downcast, trained to look at floors, baseboards, and dust bunnies, never at the guests. To the wealthy patrons of the hotel, she wasn't a person. She was a moving piece of furniture that refreshed towels and made chocolates appear on pillows. She had been pushing her heavy cart toward the service elevator when she heard the crash. Her first instinct, drilled into her by a harsh supervisor, was to freeze and stay out of the way. Don't get involved. Rich people problems are dangerous, she thought. She needed this job. She had rent to pay, and her younger brother's tuition was due in 2 weeks. Any complaint from a VIP guest meant immediate termination. But then she heard the whisper. It wasn't the demanding shout of a dissatisfied customer. It was the sound she recognized from her own life, the sound of absolute, crushing despair. Clara peeked around the side of her cart. She saw the man. She recognized him instantly, of course. Alexander Blackwood's face was on the cover of the magazine currently sitting on the nightstand of every room she had cleaned tonight. He was supposed to be a titan, but the man on the floor didn't look like a titan. He was pale, his skin possessing a clammy grayish sheen. His eyes were wide with a terror so raw it made her stomach turn. He wasn't looking at his broken briefcase. He was staring at his own legs, as if they belonged to a stranger. She looked toward the guest elevators. The group of people was walking down the hall, laughing, maybe 30 seconds away from turning the corner and seeing him. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. If she approached him, she could be fired for bothering a guest. If she touched him, she could be sued. But if she did nothing, this man was going to be destroyed in front of a live audience. She didn't make a conscious decision. Her feet simply moved. She abandoned her cart and crossed the corridor with silent, swift steps. She dropped to her knees beside him, not too close, but close enough to be a barrier between him and the hallway. Alexander flinched violently at her presence, his head snapping up. "Get away," he hissed, though there was no venom in it, only fear. "You can't see me like this." Clara didn't flinch. She didn't pull out a phone to record him. She didn't scream for help. Instead, she did something forbidden for a maid. She looked him directly in the eyes. Her eyes were a warm, startling hazel, calm amidst the storm of his panic. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, steady and surprisingly low. "You are having a spasm. You are not broken, you are just stuck, but we have about 20 seconds before those investors turn that corner." Alexander stared at her, stunned. She knew who he was, yet she wasn't reacting to his fame. She was reacting to the geometry of the situation. "I can't stand," he choked out, the admission tearing at his pride. "My legs, they're dead. I can't feel them." "I know," Clara said. She glanced quickly at the corner. The voices were getting louder.
And you don't have to stand right now, but you cannot be on the floor." She moved. It was a shock to his system. She didn't ask for permission. She reached out with rough red hands, hands scrubbed raw by chemicals and hard work, and grabbed his expensive silk tie, tucking it swiftly into his jacket so it wouldn't drag. Then she shifted her body, sliding one arm under his shoulder and the other firmly around his waist. "I am going to act like I am helping you find your contact lens," she whispered urgently near his ear. "Lean forward, put your head down, look at the carpet. Do not look up until I say so." "What?" Alexander stammered. "Do it," she commanded. It was the tone of someone who had handled crises far more real than a stock market dip.
Alexander Blackwood, a man who commanded armies of employees, obeyed the maid. He slumped forward, hiding his face just as the group of investors turned the corner. They saw a man in a suit kneeling on the floor, with a maid helpfully pointing at something in the carpet pattern. "Oh, Mr. Blackwood," one of the investors called out, a jovial man holding a martini. "Everything all right down there?" Alexander froze. His heart stopped. He couldn't speak. If he tried to answer, his voice would shake and the ruse would be over. Clara answered for him. She didn't look up, keeping her posture servile, but her voice projecting a cheerful, professional brightness that was entirely fake. "Good evening, sir. Mr. Blackwood just dropped his cufflink, a very small, very expensive one. I'm afraid I'm having a bit of trouble spotting it in this deep pile, so he's assisting me. We'll be just a moment." The lie was smooth, mundane, and perfectly believable. "Ah, the perils of fashion," the investor laughed. "Well, don't be late, Alexander. The champagne is waiting." The group chuckled and continued walking toward the elevators. They didn't stop. They didn't see the sweat pouring down Alexander's face. They didn't see that his legs were dead weight. They only saw what Clara wanted them to see, a minor inconvenience. They waited until the elevator doors dinged and slid shut. The hallway was silent again. Alexander let out a breath that sounded like a sob. He slumped heavily against Clara, his forehead resting on her shoulder. The adrenaline crash was hitting him hard. He was trembling violently now, the shame washing over him. He was clinging to a maid, a woman whose name he didn't know, a woman he probably wouldn't have looked at twice an hour ago. "They're gone," Clara said softly, her voice returning to its natural, gentle register. She didn't look up, keeping her posture servile, but her voice projecting a cheerful, professional brightness that was entirely fake. "But you can't stay here. The press will be coming up next for interviews. We have to move." Alexander pulled back slightly, looking at her with a mixture of awe and confusion. "Move? I told you, I can't walk. I can't get to my room. It's at the end of the hall. I can't." "We aren't going to your room," Clara interrupted, standing up and dusting off her knees. She looked down at him, assessing the situation. "Your room is watched. Your assistants are probably waiting there. If they see you, they call 911. And tomorrow morning the headline is, 'Blackwood Collapses.' We need a blind spot." She looked at her service card. Then she looked at the door labeled, "Service Only, Linen Closet, just 3 feet away." "Mr. Blackwood," Clara said, extending her hand toward him, "I'm going to need you to trust me. And I'm going to need you to put your arm around my neck and pull. I am stronger than I look." Alexander looked at her hand. It was scarred, nails cut short, skin dry. It was the hand of a worker, and right now, it was the only lifeline he had in the entire world. Alexander stared at the hand hovering in front of him. It was a stark contrast to the manicured, soft hands he was used to shaking in boardrooms. Clara's hand was rough, the knuckles slightly red from scrubbing, the fingernails kept strictly short and unpainted according to hotel regulations. Yet in that moment, it looked like the strongest thing in the universe. He hesitated. The conditioning of a lifetime, the belief that he was separate, above, and independent, screamed at him to refuse. But a fresh wave of agony radiated from his lumbar spine, a hot, throbbing reminder of his new reality. He had no choice. He reached out.
His fingers, trembling and cold, wrapped around hers. Her grip instantly tightened, surprising him. It wasn't a tentative hold. It was a clamp of iron determination. "On 3, Clara whispered, positioning her small frame as a lever against his side. She smelled of industrial laundry detergent and faint vanilla. 1, 2, 3. The effort was Herculean. Alexander gritted his teeth so hard he felt a molar crack. As he pushed off the floor, his legs dragged like dead weights, sending blinding flashes of white light exploding behind his eyes. A guttural groan of pure pain escaped his throat, but Clara was already moving. She wedged her shoulder firmly into his armpit, taking the brunt of his 190-pound frame. She didn't buckle, she didn't gasp, she simply absorbed his weight, her boots squeaking against the polished floor as she pivoted him toward the service door. "I've got you. I've got you," she chanted softly, a rhythmic mantra that seemed to sync with his erratic breathing. The distance to the door was only 5 feet, but it felt like 5 miles. Every inch was a battle against gravity and dignity. Alexander felt the expensive fabric of his Italian suit straining, his polished shoes dragging uselessly, scuffing the toe caps. He felt absurd, grotesque, a puppet with cut strings.
Clara reached out with her free hand, swiped her keycard against the sensor, and kicked the heavy metal door open. She practically dragged him over the threshold, into the darkness. The linen closet. The door clicked shut behind them, sealing them off from the world of chandeliers and champagne. The silence was sudden and absolute, broken only by the heavy, mechanical hum of the hotel's internal ventilation system. The space was tiny. It wasn't a room. It was a functional closet, lined with floor-to-ceiling metal wire shelves, stacked high with endless piles of crisp white towels, bedsheets, and miniatured toiletries. The air was thick with the chemical scent of bleach and the dry heat of the vents. "Easy, easy," Clara murmured. She didn't let him drop. She guided him toward the back wall, where stacks of king-size duvets were piled up in plastic wrapping. She kicked a few bundles into a makeshift seat. "Sit, slowly." Alexander collapsed onto the bundles of bedding. The relief of being off his feet was instantaneous, but it was quickly replaced by a suffocating claustrophobia. He was sitting on a pile of laundry in a closet, his legs splayed out awkwardly in front of him. The CEO of Blackwood Dynamics, the man who was supposed to be announcing a billion-dollar merger in... He checked his watch with shaking hands. 4 minutes. "I have to go," he gasped, the panic attack fully setting in now. His chest felt tight as if a vice was crushing his ribs. "I can't be here. The keynote, the investors, they're waiting." He tried to push himself up again, driven by a manic, ingrained need to perform. "Stop." Clara's voice cracked through the small space like a whip. It wasn't a whisper anymore. She stood over him, hands on her hips, blocking the door. "Look at your legs, Mr. Blackwood. Look at them." Alexander looked down. His left leg was twitching involuntarily, a rapid, jerky spasm that he couldn't control. "You are not walking onto a stage," Clara said, her voice softening but losing none of its firmness. "If you go out there, you will fall. And this time, there won't be a maid to catch you. There will be 500 cameras. Is that what you want? To become a meme? To be the face of failure on every news channel by morning?" The brutal truth of her words hit him harder than the floor had. He slumped back against the metal shelving, the cold steel pressing into his expensive jacket. Defeat tasted like bile in his throat. "I'm finished," he whispered, covering his face with his hands. "I've worked 20 years for this night, 20 years of no sleep, no holidays, no life, just this company. And it ends in a linen closet." Clara watched him crumble. She saw the architect of the future reduced to a terrified man. She didn't pity him. She recognized the symptoms. She stepped closer, invading his personal space in the cramped closet. She knelt down, not in subservience, but to be at eye level. "It doesn't end here unless you let it," she said. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, sealed bottle of water. Hotel complimentary stock. She cracked the seal and held it out to him. "Drink. Your lips are blue. You're in shock." Alexander took the bottle, his hand shaking so badly, water splashed onto his silk tie. He didn't care. He drank greedily. "How do you know?" asked Alexander, wiping his mouth. He looked at her properly for the first time. He saw the stray wisp of brown hair escaping her bun, the fatigue lines around her eyes, and the name tag pinned crookedly to her uniform. "Clara. How do you know about this?" He gestured vaguely to his paralyzed legs. Clara sat back on her heels, resting her hands on her apron. "My father worked construction. High-rise steel. He fell 2 stories. He didn't break anything, but the trauma to his back, he locked up just like you. Psychosomatic guarding, the doctors called it. His body was so afraid of moving that it just shut down the controls." "Did he walk again?" Alexander asked, his voice sounding small. "Eventually," Clara said, "but not because he forced it. He had to learn to stop fighting his own body. Right now, your body is screaming at you to stop, and you're screaming at it to move. You're at war with yourself, Mr. Blackwood, and you're losing." Alexander closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the towels. The humiliation was fading, replaced by a strange, surreal intimacy. He was hiding in a closet with a stranger who understood his pain better than his $500 an hour private physician. "So what do I do?" asked Alexander, the arrogance completely drained from his tone. "I can't stay in here forever. Eventually someone will come looking for towels. Or for me."
Clara looked around the small space, her mind working differently than his. He saw a prison, she saw resources. She was used to making things work with limited supplies. She stood up and began moving with efficient, practiced motions. "We need to reduce the inflammation immediately," she stated. She grabbed a metal ice bucket from a shelf, one of those meant for champagne, and filled it with small bags of ice from a cooler stored in the corner for room service. She wrapped the ice in a thick, plush hand towel. "Lean forward," she instructed. "I told you I can't move much," Alexander grunted. "I'll help. Pivot your hips," she said, moving behind him. The space was so tight her uniform brushed against his cheek. She smelled of hard work and soap. She gently guided his torso forward, exposing the lower curve of his back. She pressed the ice pack against his lumbar spine. The cold was shocking, but the relief was almost orgasmic. The searing heat in his nerves began to dull. Alexander let out a long, shuddering breath, his shoulders dropping 2 inches. "Better?" she asked. "Yes," he breathed. "God, yes." "Now, the problem," Clara said, stepping back to face him, leaning against the door. "You have a speech in 2 minutes. You are not going to make it. You need to call someone. Who do you trust? Your vice president? Your wife?" Alexander laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "I don't have a wife. I don't have time for one. And my vice president, Marcus?" He shook his head. "Marcus is a shark. If he finds out I'm incapacitated, he won't help me. He'll invoke the incapacity clause in our bylaws and take the CEO chair before my body hits the hospital bed.
He's been waiting for a slip-up like this for 5 years. He looked up at Clara, his eyes dark and desperate. I have no one, Clara. Everyone out there is on the payroll or on the board. They are assets or liabilities. None of them are friends. The confession hung heavy in the scented air of the closet. It was the tragic punchline of his success. The most powerful man in the building was the loneliest man in the building. Clara looked at him, and her heart broke a little, not for the billionaire, but for the human. She understood loneliness. She felt it every time she ate dinner alone in her studio apartment after a 12-hour shift. "You have me," she said. The words came out before she could check them. Alexander looked at her startled. "You? I'm not on your payroll, I'm not on your board, and I don't want your job," Clara said, a small, wry smile touching her lips. "I just want to make sure you don't die on my floor. It's too much paperwork." For the first time that night, a flicker of something resembling amusement crossed Alexander's face. It transformed him, softening the sharp angles of his stress. "Okay, Clara," he said, testing the name. "I have you. But unless you can carry me onto that stage and deliver a keynote speech on aerospace dynamics, I'm still in trouble." Clara bit her lip, thinking. She looked at the shelves again. She looked at the service elevator call button on the wall. Then she looked at the rolling laundry cart she had abandoned in the hallway. An idea, crazy and risky, began to form. "You can't walk," she said slowly, her mind racing. "But you can sit. You can sit tall. You look like a king when you sit." "I can't sit in a wheelchair," he shot back, the old pride flaring up. "It projects weakness." "Who said anything about a wheelchair?" Clara asked, her eyes narrowing with a plan. "We are in a 5-star hotel, Mr. Blackwood. Everything here is about presentation. We don't use wheelchairs, we use thrones." She reached for the door handle. "Where are you going?" Alexander asked, panic returning instantly. "Don't leave me." "I'm not leaving you," she promised, her hand on the latch. "But you have to trust me. Can you do that? Can you trust the maid?" Alexander looked at the woman who had already saved him once. He looked at the ice pack she had made. He felt the cold numbness soothing his back. He realized, with a shock, that he trusted her more than he had trusted anyone in a decade. "I trust you," he said. "Good," Clara nodded. "Stay put. Don't move. And for heaven's sake, keep that ice on your back." She slipped out of the closet, leaving Alexander alone in the dim light. He sat there, a billionaire on a pile of laundry, waiting for a maid to decide his fate. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like the architect of the future. He felt like a man waiting to be saved.
Alexander was alone again. The silence in the closet was heavy, punctuated only by the aggressive buzzing of his smartphone lying on the floor. The screen lit up the small, dim space with a harsh white light. Incoming call, Marcus Vane, VP. Missed calls, 14. Alexander stared at the name, Marcus Vane, the man who had been his college roommate, his best man, and now his hungriest wolf. Marcus didn't care about the company's vision. He cared about the stock price and the power that came with it. If Alexander didn't walk onto that stage in, he checked the timer, 3 minutes, Marcus would step up. He would offer a charming apology for Alexander's sudden absence, spin a narrative of instability, and effectively launch a soft coup before the appetizers were served. Alexander reached for the phone, his fingers stiff. He swiped, answer. "Alex?" Marcus's voice was smooth, too smooth. It sounded like polished chrome. "The music is starting, Alex. The spotlight is sweeping the stage. You are conspicuously absent. Should I tell them you got cold feet? Or maybe a health issue?" The insinuation was venomous. In their world, health issues were blood in the water. "I'm on my way, Marcus," Alexander lied.
his voice sounding raspier than he intended. "Just finalizing the acquisition numbers. Don't step on that stage." "You have 60 seconds," Marcus replied, his cone dropping the friendly facade. "Then I take the mic. And if I take the mic, Alex, I'm not giving it back." The line went dead. Alexander dropped the phone. His chest heaved. He tried to move his legs again, fueled by pure rage. "Move. Damn you, move." He struck his own thigh with a clenched fist. Nothing. It was like hitting a sandbag. He was trapped in a body that had resigned. The door handle turned. Alexander stiffened, terror spiking. If it was Marcus, it was over. If it was a random staff member, it was over. The door eased open. It was Clara. She looked winded, but triumphant. She was pushing a heavy-duty concierge wheelchair, the kind used for VIP guests, with a high back and plush padding, but to Alexander, it still looked like a symbol of defeat. "I can't," Alexander said instantly, recoiling. "That's a wheelchair. It screams invalid. The moment they see those chrome wheels, the stock crashes." "Not the way I'm going to style it," Clara said, moving with a speed that blurred. She reached into the pile of linens and pulled out a heavy black velvet banquet tablecloth. "What are you doing?" "Hiding the medical machinery," she replied. She draped the heavy black fabric over the chair with the precision of a master upholsterer. She tucked a cloth around the armrests and let it hang down to the floor, completely concealing the shiny metal spokes of the wheels and the footrests. Within seconds, the medical device had vanished. In its place was what looked like a floating, high-backed executive throne draped in black velvet. It looked avant-garde. It looked expensive. It looked powerful. "Now," she said, stepping back to admire her work, "it doesn't look like a wheelchair. It looks like a throne on wheels, and rich people get to be eccentric. Poor people are crazy. Rich people are avant-garde." Alexander looked at the improvised throne. It was genius. "You really are wasted in housekeeping," he muttered, impressed. "But first," she stopped, looking at him critically, "you're a mess." She stepped into his personal space again. Alexander flinched, instinctively pulling back. He wasn't used to being touched, certainly not by staff, and certainly not when he was sitting on a pile of towels. "Stop moving," Clara ordered gently. She reached out and brushed a smudge of wall dust from his lapel. Her hands were quick and deft. She straightened his tie, which had been crooked by his fall. She refolded the pocket square that had come loose. Then she did something that made Alexander's breath catch. She reached into her apron pocket, pulled out a small travel pack of wet wipes, and knelt between his splayed legs. "Your shoes," she murmured, focused on the task. "You scuffed the toes when you fell. A CEO doesn't have scuffed shoes." She wiped the black leather until the scuff marks faded into a shine. Alexander watched the top of her head, the humble curve of her neck. He felt a lump form in his throat. He had assistants who managed his calendar, stylists who bought his clothes, and drivers who navigated the city, but none of them had ever cared about his dignity. They cared about his image. Clara was on her knees in a closet, scrubbing his shoes not because she was paid to, but because she understood that his armor was cracked. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the hum of the vents. "Why are you doing this? I could have fired you for being late with the turndown service."
Clara stopped scrubbing. She looked up, her hazel eyes locking onto his stormy gray ones. "Because everyone deserves to keep their pride, Mr. Blackwood," she said simply. "Even people who have too much money." She stood up and offered her hands again. "Now, up. We have to go through the service elevator. The kitchen connects directly to the back of the ballroom stage. It's the only way to bypass the lobby." "The kitchen?" Alexander grimaced. "I'm going to smell like grease." "Better to smell like French fries than fear," Clara countered. "Trust me." The transfer was harder this time. The adrenaline had faded, leaving Alexander's body heavy and uncooperative. He wrapped his arms around Clara's neck, burying his face in the crook of her shoulder. He felt the delicate bones of her collarbone, the strength in her back. She grunted with effort, lifting with her legs, pivoting him. For a moment, they were pressed together, chest to chest, in a suspended embrace. He could feel her heart racing against his ribs. It was a rhythm of anxiety and exertion. He realized with a shock that she was terrified too. She was risking her job, her livelihood for a stranger. She lowered him into the library chair. It was sturdy. He gripped the armrests, his knuckles white. "Okay," Clara exhaled, checking her watch. "We have 2 minutes to get to the freight elevator, go down 40 floors, navigate the kitchen during dinner rush, and get you behind that curtain before Marcus steals your microphone. Ready?" Alexander straightened his spine. He adjusted his cuffs. He channeled every ounce of the Iron CEO persona he had left. But this time, it wasn't fueled by arrogance. It was fueled by the quiet strength of the woman standing behind him. "Drive," he commanded softly. Clara unlocked the door and pushed. The service hallway. They burst out of the closet. Clara didn't walk. She marched. She pushed the heavy trolley with a deceptive ease. The wheels rumbled over the carpet. They reached the service elevator bank. Clara slammed the down button repeatedly. Come on," she muttered. The doors groaned open. It wasn't empty. Standing inside was Mrs. Higgins, the head of housekeeping, a woman with hair like steel wool and a personality to match. She held a clipboard like a weapon. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene. Clara, sweaty and disheveled, pushing a luggage cart containing the most famous man in New York, who was currently sitting on a library chair draped in a tablecloth. Mrs. Higgins blocked the entrance. "Clara, what in God's name is this? Guests are not permitted in the service elevators. And why do you have Mr. Blackwood on is that a trolley?" Alexander felt the panic rise. This was it. The game was up. He opened his mouth to bark an order, to fire someone, to do something, but he had no voice. Clara didn't hesitate. She didn't stutter. She looked her terrifying boss in the eye and lied with the confidence of a sociopath. "Mrs. Higgins, thank goodness," Clara gasped, feigning relief. "Mr. Blackwood is conducting a secret security audit, a secret stress test of our emergency evacuation protocols for VIPs with limited mobility. He specifically requested the most discreet extraction route to the kitchen to test response times." She gestured frantically at her watch. "We are currently being timed, Mrs. Higgins. If we don't hit the kitchen checkpoint in 60 seconds, the hotel fails the audit. Do you want to be the reason the hotel loses its 5-diamond safety rating?" The supervisor's face paled. She stepped aside instantly, holding the door open. "Of course, sir. My apologies. Go!" Clara shoved the cart into the elevator. The doors closed, cutting off Mrs. Higgins' terrified face. As the elevator began its descent, picking up speed, Alexander let out a short, incredulous laugh. He looked back at Clara. She was leaning against the wall, shaking her hands out. "A security audit?" Alexander asked, eyebrows raised. "It was the first thing that popped into my head," she admitted, a small, nervous smile breaking through. "I watch a lot of spy movies." "Remind me to give you a raise," Alexander said. And for the first time in years, he wasn't talking about money as a tool for control. He was talking about value. "Let's get you on stage first," Clara said, as the floor numbers ticked down. 30, 20, 10.
The elevator jolted to a halt at the basement level. The doors opened, and a wall of noise hit them. The kitchen. It was a war zone of shouting chefs, clattering pans, and sizzling oil. Steam filled the air, waiters were sprinting with trays held high, and in the middle of this chaos, Clara had to push a paralyzed billionaire without anyone noticing that the emperor had no legs. "Head down," Clara whispered, gripping the handles of the trolley. "We're going through the fire." She pushed him into the steam. The hotel kitchen. The doors of the service elevator opened and hell broke loose. The kitchen of the Grand Vermilion was a labyrinth of stainless steel, open flames, and shouting. It was the peak of the dinner rush. 50 chefs in white coats moved with military precision, juggling pans of searing scallops and reduction sauces. Alexander, seated on his improvised throne, felt a wave of heat hit his face. It was humid, smelling of garlic, truffle oil, and sweat.
He shrank back, instinctively raising a hand to shield his face. If a photo of him being wheeled past a garbage bin by a maid leaked out, the humiliating caption wrote itself. "Keep your head down," Clara shouted, over the din of a crashing pot. "Elbows in!" She didn't wait for a gap in the traffic. She created one. She drove the luggage trolley like a battering ram. "Hot! Behind! Corner!" Clara yelled, her voice projecting with a shocking authority that cut through the kitchen noise. A sous chef holding a tray of flaming steaks spun around, eyes wide. He saw the maid and the suited man barreling toward him. He leaped out of the way just as Clara swerved the cart, the wheels skidding on the greasy red tiles. Alexander gripped the armrests of the library chair until his knuckles turned white. He watched the chaos blur past him. He saw the bewildered faces of dishwashers and line cooks. For the first time in his life, he was seeing the engine that powered his luxurious lifestyle from the bottom up. "Make a hole," Clara commanded, steering him toward the double doors marked "Stage Right, Access." A waiter, balancing a tower of dirty plates, froze in their path. "Move, Marco!" Clara barked, not slowing down. The waiter dove to the left. Clara pushed the cart through the gap with inches to spare. They burst through the double doors and into the sudden, cool darkness of the backstage wing. The noise of the kitchen was instantly cut off as the heavy soundproof doors swung shut behind them. Backstage, the wings. The silence here was different. It was the tense, electric silence of a performance about to begin. Through the heavy velvet curtains, the muffled sound of a string quartet playing Mozart could be heard. Clara stopped the cart. She was panting heavily, her chest heaving beneath her uniform. Her hair was coming loose, framing her face in messy tendrils. She leaned over the back of the chair, catching her breath. "We made it! 2 minutes to spare!" Alexander unclenched his hands. They were shaking. He looked up at her, and the expression on his face was of profound disorientation. "You drive like a maniac," he said, but his voice was filled with awe. "I learned to drive in Queens," Clara replied. "Kitchens are easy. Traffic on the LIE is hard." "Well, well, well." The voice slithered out of the shadows like a snake. Alexander's spine stiffened. He didn't need to turn his head to know who it was. Marcus Vane stepped into the dim blue light of the backstage area. He was holding a microphone, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked perfect, predatory. Marcus stared at the sight before him. The CEO of Blackwood Dynamics, sitting on a library chair strapped to a luggage cart, covered in a tablecloth, being attended to by a disheveled maid. A slow, cruel smile spread across Marcus's face. "I have to say, Alex," Marcus chuckled, walking slowly around the cart, "I expected you to crash and burn. I didn't expect you to join the circus. What is this, a parade float?" He looked at Clara with open disgust. "And you brought the help. How quaint!" Alexander felt the old rage flare up, but his body betrayed him. He tried to sit up straighter, but a spasm of pain shot through his back, making him wince. Marcus saw it. "You can't even stand, can you?" Marcus whispered, leaning in close, smelling of expensive scotch. "You're done, Alex. Look at you. You're a cripple on a cart. If you go out there, they will laugh you out of the building. Let me go out. I'll tell them you had a stroke. It's dignified." He reached for the curtain rope. "Go back to the hospital, Alex. The adults are talking now."
Alexander opened his mouth, but the shame choked him. Marcus was right. He looked ridiculous. Then Clara stepped in between them. She didn't shove Marcus physically. She simply occupied the space between the two men, blocking Marcus's view of Alexander. She stood at her full height, which was 5 inches shorter than Marcus, but she looked like a giant. "And I can scream," Clara began, but then she stopped. She saw the sneer on Marcus's face. He wasn't afraid of screaming maid. He would just have security drag her out. Clara's eyes hardened. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her phone. The screen was already glowing.
"Actually, screaming is unprofessional," she said, her voice deadly calm. She held the phone up, the camera lens pointed directly at Marcus's face. "I've been live streaming this entire interaction to my private cloud. I hit record the moment you started insulting him." Marcus froze. The arrogant smile vanished instantly. "You're bluffing," he hissed, eyeing the phone. "Try me," Clara challenged, stepping closer. "Go ahead, Mr. Vane. Stop him. Mock his legs one more time. I'll send this clip to TMZ and the board of directors before the curtain even opens. The headline won't be about Alexander's health. It will be, 'VP caught on tape mocking disabled CEO. You'll be fired for discrimination by morning.'" Marcus looked at the red recording bot on her screen. He looked at the curtain. He calculated the PR nightmare. It was a risk he couldn't take. With a sneer of pure hatred, he backed off, raising his hands in surrender. "You little rat. Enjoy the show, Alex. I'll be watching the stock price drop from the front row." He turned and stalked off into the darkness, defeated not by force, but by leverage. Alexander let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He looked at Clara's back. She was trembling now, the adrenaline crash hitting her. "You threatened the vice president," Alexander murmured. "He was standing in the light," Clara said, her voice shaking slightly. "You needed the path clear." She turned to him. She grabbed the handles of the cart again. The string quartet stopped playing. The room out there went silent. A voice on the loudspeaker announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the CEO of Blackwood Dynamics, Mr. Alexander Blackwood." Applause rippled through the ballroom. "This is it," Alexander whispered. Terror gripped him again. "Clara, I can't walk to the podium. The podium is standing height. I'm down here. I'm sitting." "Then don't go to the podium," Clara said fast. "We make our own center stage." She didn't give him time to argue. She pushed the cart. The ballroom stage. The heavy velvet curtains parted. The bright spotlights hit them instantly, blinding and hot. The applause faltered. It didn't stop, but it became confused. 500 heads turned. They expected a man striding confidently to the center. Instead, they saw a woman in a maid's uniform pushing a seated man on a strange rolling platform. The silence that followed was heavy. Confused whispers started to rise. Is he sick? Is this a skit? Clara ignored the 1,000 eyes staring at her. She kept her head high, pushing the cart to the absolute center of the stage. She moved with a dignity that demanded respect. She stopped the cart. She reached down and locked the wheels with a loud, decisive click that echoed in the microphone system. She didn't run off stage. She didn't hide. She walked around the cart, adjusted the tablecloth one last time, and then took a step back, standing just behind Alexander's right shoulder, a silent sentinel. Alexander sat there. The lights were burning his eyes. He could see the confused faces in the front row. He saw Marcus Vane smirking. He felt the phantom sensation of his useless legs. He looked at the microphone stand. It was too high. He couldn't reach it. Clara saw the problem. She walked over to the microphone stand. She didn't adjust it. She pulled the microphone off the stand, holding it in her hand. She walked back to Alexander and handed it to him. Their fingers brushed. "You are safe," her touch seemed to say. Alexander gripped the cold metal of the microphone. He looked at the crowd. He looked at Clara. And suddenly, the fear evaporated. The worst had already happened. He had fallen. He had been broken. He was sitting on a laundry cart in front of the world. And he was still alive. He brought the mic to his lips. "Good evening," Alexander said. His voice was deep, steady, and amplified through the massive speakers. "I know what you are thinking. You are wondering why the man who promised to build the future is sitting down." He paused. The room held its breath. "I am sitting down," Alexander continued, looking directly at Marcus Vane in the front row, "because tonight I learned a lesson that isn't taught in business school. I learned that the strongest structures are not the ones that stand rigid against the wind. The strongest structures are the ones that are supported." He gestured to Clara. The spotlight widened to include her. She looked small in her gray uniform, but she stood like a statue. "This is Clara. 10 minutes ago, I collapsed. My body failed me. I was on the floor, ready to give up. I was ready to let fear dictate my future. Clara didn't let me." A gasp went through the audience. This was off script. This was raw. "She picked me up," Alexander said, his voice thickening with emotion. "She didn't see a CEO. She saw a human being in pain. And she reminded me that true leadership isn't about standing tall when it's easy. It's about finding a way to move forward when you can't even stand." Alexander leaned forward in his chair, his eyes blazing with a new kind of intensity. "Tonight, I am announcing the acquisition of Horizon Aerospace, but I am doing it from this chair. Because if we are going to build the future, we cannot do it alone. We need support. We need to lean on each other. And sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who helps you up." For a second, there was silence. Absolute silence. Then, a single person started clapping. Then another. Then the entire room rose. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar. It was a standing ovation, not for the deal, but for the truth. Marcus Vane sat in the front row, stone-faced, as the room erupted around him. He had lost. On stage, Alexander didn't look at the crowd. He turned his head and looked up at Clara. "Thank you," he mouthed. Clara, the invisible maid, blushed a deep crimson. She offered him a tiny, shy smile. And in that moment, amidst the flashing cameras and the roaring crowd, a connection was forged that was stronger than steel. Backstage, the wings. The applause was still thundering as Clara wheeled Alexander back behind the heavy velvet curtains. The moment they crossed the threshold into the shadows of the wings, the adrenaline that had been holding Alexander upright evaporated. He slumped forward in the library chair, a low groan escaping his throat. His face, which had been composed and powerful on stage, crumpled into a mask of sheer exhaustion. "We need to get you out of here," Clara said, instantly, her hand resting on his shoulder. "The adrenaline dump is real. The pain is going to come back 10 times worse in about 5 minutes. "I did it," Alexander whispered, his voice sounding dazed. "I actually did it." "You did," Clara confirmed softly. "But the show is over. Now you're a patient again." Before they could move toward the exit, a swarm of people descended on them. Not the press, not yet, but Alexander's team. A dozen assistants, PR managers, and legal aides who had been noticeably absent when he was on the floor in the hallway were now crowding around, waving phones and tablets. "Mr. Blackwood, that was genius! The supported leader angle is trending #1 on Twitter," a PR woman shrieked, tapping her screen. "Sir, the stock actually jumped 4% during the speech. The market loves the vulnerability narrative," an analyst shouted. "Mr. Blackwood, should we issue a statement about your condition? Was it a planned stunt?" They crowded the cart, their voices loud and demanding, treating Alexander like a winning racehorse rather than an injured man. They didn't even look at Clara. To them, she was just a prop that had served its purpose. One assistant actually reached out to push the cart away from Clara, saying, "We'll take it from here, honey." Alexander's head snapped up. The weakness vanished from his eyes, replaced by the cold steel that had built an empire. "Don't touch the cart," he growled. The assistant froze, hand hovering in midair. The circle of sycophants fell silent. "Step back," Alexander commanded, his voice low and dangerous. "All of you, give us 10 feet." The team shuffled back, confused. Alexander turned his head, straining his neck to look at Clara. She was standing there, hands clasped in front of her apron, ready to fade back into the background, ready to be invisible again. "Clara," Alexander said, "get me to my car. Just you." "But sir, the press is waiting at the north exit. We need to prep the statement." "I said," Alexander cut him off, "Clara takes me. If anyone else tries to steer this cart, they're fired. Is that clear?" The silence was absolute. Clara looked at him, surprised by his defense of her. She nodded once, grabbed the handles, and steered him away from the sharks, heading toward the private loading dock. The armored limousine. The back of Alexander's Maybach was a sanctuary of black leather and tinted glass. Clara helped him transfer from the library chair into the back seat. It was an awkward, painful process, but neither of them cared about dignity anymore. They just cared about relief. When he was settled, leaning back with a groan of relief, he looked at the open door. Clara was standing outside, on the concrete of the loading dock, shivering slightly in the night air. She looked like she was waiting to be dismissed. "Where are you going?" Alexander asked. "My shift isn't over, Mr. Blackwood," she said, gesturing vaguely back to the hotel. "I have rooms to turn down on the 41st floor, and I have to return the library chair before Mrs. Higgins notices." Alexander looked at her. He saw the fatigue in her eyes. He saw the redness of her hands. He realized that after saving his entire career, she was planning to go back to scrubbing toilets for minimum wage. The thought of it made him physically ill. "Get in," he said. "Excuse me?" "Get in the car, Clara. You're done working for the hotel." "Mr. Blackwood, I can't just leave. I need this job. I have bills." "Clara," he interrupted gently, "you just saved a $1 billion merger. I think I can cover your shift. Please, I don't want to be alone right now." It was the vulnerability in his voice that did it. The great CEO was scared of the silence. Clara hesitated, looked back at the service entrance, and then made a choice. She stepped into the car, and the heavy door sealed them inside. The ride home. The car glided through the streets of Manhattan. Inside, it was quiet. Alexander had pressed a button to raise the privacy partition, separating them from the driver. He watched Clara out of the corner of his eye. She was sitting stiffly on the edge of the leather seat, hands folded in her lap, looking out the window at the passing city lights. She looked out of place, yet strangely right. "I have a private physician meeting us at my penthouse. He'll have pain management ready." "Good," Clara said. "You need anti-inflammatories and rest. At least 2 weeks. No flights, no meetings." She chuckled, a dry sound. "You're still giving orders?" "Someone has to," she replied, turning to face him. "You're terrible at taking care of yourself. I saw your shoes." "My shoes?" "Expensive Italian leather, but the soles were worn thin. And your eyes. You have the eyes of someone who hasn't slept more than 4 hours a night in 5 years. You treat your body like a rental car you're planning to crash.
Alexander fell silent. No one spoke to him like this. Everyone else treated him like a fragile genius or a terrifying boss. Clara treated him like a human with bad habits. "I live alone," Alexander said suddenly. "I have a house staff, cooks, cleaners, but they leave at 8 p.m. After that, it's just me and the silence. That's why I work late. I hate the echo." Alexander fell silent. No one spoke to him like this. Everyone else treated him like a fragile genius or a terrifying boss. Clara treated him like a human with bad habits. "I live alone," Alexander said suddenly. "I have a house staff, cooks, cleaners, but they leave at 8 p.m. After that, it's just me and the silence. That's why I work late. I hate the echo." Clara looked at him with soft empathy. "A big house is just a lot of empty space if there's no noise in it." "Clara," Alexander turned his body painfully to face her fully, "I want to offer you a job." "I'm a maid, Mr. Blackwood. I don't know anything about corporate mergers or aerospace. I don't need a corporate strategist. I have 100 of those, and they're all sharks," he said intensely. I need what you did tonight. I need someone who tells me the truth. Someone who sees the person, not the CEO. I want you to be my personal care assistant during my recovery. And after that, we'll see." Clara stared at him. "You want me to quit the hotel to take care of you? I'll triple your salary. I'll pay for your brother's tuition. Yes, I heard you mention it on the phone earlier. Full benefits. Live in accommodation if you want it, or a private car to take you home." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "But mostly, I'm asking because I don't think I can walk through this recovery alone. And I don't trust anyone else to catch me if I fall." Clara looked at her rough hands. She thought about the grueling shifts, the rude guests, the constant fear of not making rent. Then she looked at Alexander, a powerful man who was currently looking at her with desperate hope. "I won't wear a uniform," she said firmly. Alexander smiled, the first genuine smile of the night. "Deal." The penthouse. The elevator opened directly into Alexander's penthouse. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture, floor-to-ceiling glass, black marble floors, minimalist white furniture. And it was freezing. Clara shivered as she stepped out. The place felt like a museum, not a home. There were no photos on the walls, no coats on the rack, no stray books or cups. It was perfect, sterile, and utterly dead. "It's nice," Clara lied politely. "It's a mausoleum," Alexander corrected her, grimacing as he leaned heavily on the cane the driver had handed him. "But it has a view." Dr. Aris, a gray solemn body, walked over as Alexander during a great Alexander. Dr. Aris, a stern-looking man in a gray suit, was waiting in the living room. He didn't look happy. "Alexander," the doctor sighed, walking over, "I saw the news. A library chair, really? You have likely aggravated the herniation by 30%. You need immediate injections and total bed rest." The doctor looked at Clara. "Who is this? Staff should use the service entrance." "She is not staff," Alexander said sharply, leaning on Clara's arm to limp toward the sofa. "She is my private medical liaison. She stays. Talk to her." The doctor looked baffled, but Alexander was already lowering himself onto the white leather sofa, closing his eyes against the pain. For the next hour, Clara took charge. She didn't have a medical degree, but she had practical intelligence. She listened to the doctor's complex instructions and translated them into reality. When the doctor said immobilization, Clara went to the linen closet, which was huge and full of luxury Egyptian cotton, and returned with pillows to construct a support system on the couch. When the doctor prescribed pills, Clara went to the kitchen, found it empty of food, and immediately ordered a broth delivery, because you can't take strong painkillers on an empty stomach. By midnight, the doctor was gone. The lights were dimmed. The city of New York glowed outside the glass walls. Alexander was lying on the sofa, propped up by the pillows Clara had arranged. The painkillers were kicking in, softening the edges of his world. Clara was sitting in the armchair opposite him, watching him to make sure his breathing was steady. She had taken off her shoes. "Clara," Alexander murmured, his voice heavy with sleep. "I'm here," she replied softly. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not leaving me in the closet." "I would never," she said. "Why?" he asked, his eyes fluttering closed. "I was a stranger, a rude stranger." Clara looked at the sleeping face of the billionaire. He looked younger now, without the scowl. "Because," she whispered to the room, "I know what it's like to scream for help and have everyone keep walking. I promised myself I'd never be the person who keeps walking." Alexander didn't hear her. He was finally asleep. But for the first time in years, he wasn't sleeping alone in the empty dark. He was guarded. The penthouse. The following weeks. The recovery was not a montage of easy victories. It was a slow, grueling war of inches. For the first week, Alexander was confined to the penthouse, a lion trapped in a glass cage. The man who was used to flying across 3 time zones in a single day was now forced to navigate the 20 feet between his bed and the living room sofa. But something fundamentally had changed in the atmosphere of the penthouse. Before Clara, the apartment was a vacuum. Silence, cold marble, and takeout boxes eaten over spreadsheets. Now it was alive. Clara didn't just organize his medication, she organized his life. She opened the heavy blackout curtains that Alexander kept permanently drawn, flooding the room with morning light. "Plants need sun to grow, Mr. Blackwood, and so do you," she'd said. She brought in fresh flowers, cheap bodega daisies that looked shockingly bright against the expensive Italian furniture. The smell of the apartment changed. The sterile scent of cleaning products was replaced by the warm, savory aroma of homemade soup and brewing coffee. Clara refused to order from the high-end catering service he used. She cooked in his pristine, unused kitchen, humming soft songs while she worked. The recovery was not a montage of easy victories. It was a brutal, sweating war of inches. Alexander didn't just rest, he worked. Every morning at 5 a.m., a private physiotherapist arrived to torture his atrophied muscles, but it was Clara who acted as the drill sergeant when the doctor left. She was there for every groan of pain, every trembling attempt to stand. When he wanted to quit during his core stabilization exercises, Clara didn't coddle him. "2 more reps, Alexander," she would say firmly, standing over him while he shook with exertion on the yoga mat. "You built a billion-dollar company. You can lift your left leg 3 inches. Push." She didn't just organize his medication, she organized his will to fight. She drove him to the edge of his endurance, and then she was there with an ice pack and a protein shake when he collapsed. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Alexander sat on the edge of the sofa, frustration radiating off him in waves. He was trying to put on his socks. It was a simple task for a child, but for a man with a rigid lumbar brace and stiff muscles, it was a humiliating impossibility. He reached down, gasped in pain, and threw the sock across the room in a fit of temper. "Useless," he shouted at the empty air. "Absolutely useless." Clara appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. She didn't flinch at his anger. She had seen him at his worst in the linen closet. A thrown sock didn't scare her. She walked over, picked up the sock, and knelt in front of him. "You're not useless, Alexander," she said calmly, using his first name. They had dropped the Mr. days ago. "You're healing. Healing is ugly work. It's harder than building a company." She gently lifted his foot,
placing it on her knee. Her hands were warm. She worked the sock on with a patience that made his throat tight. Alexander looked down at her, the curve of her neck, the concentration on her face. He felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to touch her hair, to thank her, to tell her that she was the only real thing in his entire world. "Why are you so good to me?" he asked, his voice rough. "I was just a guest in a hotel. You don't owe me this."
Clara finished with the sock and looked up. Her hazel eyes were clear and honest. "My father used to say that you can tell everything about a person by how they act when the lights go out. When you were on that floor, you weren't worried about your suit. You were worried about your company, your people. You cared deeply, Alexander. You just forgot how to show it to yourself." She stood up and offered him a hand. "Now come on. It's time for your laps. To the window and back. Twice." The turning point. 3 weeks later, the brace came off. Dr. Aris gave the green light for unassisted walking, but with a warning. "Your muscles are ready, Alexander, but your mind might not be. The fear of falling is a powerful memory." That evening, the city lights of New York were glittering like diamonds below them. Alexander stood by the kitchen island, gripping the marble edge. His cane was leaning against the wall 10 feet away. Clara stood by the window, watching him. "You can do this," she said softly. "Let go of the counter." Alexander looked at the floor. It looked miles away. The memory of the hotel hallway, the sudden paralysis, the helplessness, flashed through his mind. His palms began to sweat. I don't know," he admitted. The titan of industry was gone. Only the man remained. "If I fall." "If you fall, I catch you," Clara said. She didn't move toward him. She stood her ground, forcing him to bridge the gap. She opened her arms slightly. "Walk to me, Alexander. Just look at me. Don't look at your feet. Look at my eyes." Alexander took a breath. He looked at Clara. He focused on the hazel of her eyes, the kindness that had been his anchor for a month. He let go of the counter. 1 step. His legs shook, but it held. 2 steps. The silence in the room was deafening. 3 steps. He was halfway there. He started to wobble. A spasm of doubt hit him, and he tilted to the right. "Eyes on me," Clara commanded, her voice sharp and grounding. "Stay with me." Alexander locked his gaze on her. He found his balance and took the final 2 steps and collapsed, not onto the floor, but into her arms. Clara caught him. The impact pushed her back against the glass window, but she held him fast. His arms wrapped around her waist, burying his face in her neck, breathing in the scent of vanilla and life. She held him tight, her hands stroking the back of his head. "I've got you," she whispered into his ear. "See, you're standing." Alexander pulled back just enough to look at her. His heart was hammering against his chest, but it wasn't from the exertion. It was from the proximity. She was right there, the woman who had saved him, the woman who had seen him broken and hadn't looked away. "I'm standing," he murmured, his voice full of wonder. "But I don't want to walk away." The air between them changed. It became charged, heavy with the unspoken feelings that had been building in the quiet moments of the last month. "Clara," Alexander said, his voice dropping to a vulnerable whisper, "I have spent my entire life climbing mountains. I wanted to be at the top so no one could touch me. But it's cold at the top. It's so lonely." He reached up, cupping her face in his hands. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. "I don't want to be the architect of the future anymore. Not if it means being there without you. You didn't just fix my back, Clara. You fixed the broken parts of me that no doctor could see." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Alexander, I'm just the maid who found you in the hallway." "No," he shook his head firmly. "You are the woman who reminded me who I am. You are my partner, my best friend. And if you'll let me, I want to be the man who takes care of you for a change." He leaned in. Clara didn't pull away. She closed her eyes and leaned into him. When they kissed, it wasn't the tentative kiss of two strangers. It was the desperate, passionate collision of two souls who had finally found their matching piece. It was a kiss that tasted of second chances and promises kept.
6 months later, the ballroom of the Grand Vermilion Hotel was packed again. The cameras were flashing, the world was watching. Alexander Blackwood walked onto the stage. He wasn't limping. He walked with a strong, fluid stride, projecting power and confidence. But he wasn't alone. Walking beside him, her hand firmly in his, was Clara. She wasn't wearing a gray uniform. She was wearing a stunning midnight blue evening gown that matched her eyes. She looked radiant, not because of the dress, but because she was looking at Alexander with a pride that lit up the room. Alexander approached the microphone. He looked at the crowd, then he looked at Clara. "They call me a self-made man," Alexander spoke into the mic, his voice booming. "But that is a lie. No man makes himself alone." He squeezed Clara's hand, lifting it for everyone to see. "We all stumble," he said, looking directly at the camera. "We all have moments where our legs fail us, where the weight of the world is too heavy. And in those moments, status doesn't matter. Money doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is having a hand to hold. I found mine." He smiled at her, a smile of pure, unadulterated love. "And I'm never letting go." The crowd erupted, but amidst the noise and the lights, Alexander and Clara were in their own world, standing tall, supported by the only thing that truly lasts, each other. Sometimes the people we overlook are the ones holding the strength we desperately need. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about love, redemption, and the unexpected twists of fate. And remember, be kind to everyone you meet. You never know who might be the one to save you when you fall. See you in the next story.